What is going on, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of Hutch Coming in Clutch. I'm your host, Hutchison Brown, and today we've got a fantastic show. Cannot wait to get into the episode today. We are breaking down all of what happened in week 2 of the 2025 NFL season, taking away the biggest headlines, biggest takeaways for fantasy purposes, who to buy, who to sell, who to hold, who to pick up on waivers, everything you need to know from week 2 in fantasy football. Before I get into the show today, please follow me on Twitter. I'm at HutchisonB_FF. Make sure you subscribe to this podcast wherever you're listening, so you'll be notified every single time a new episode does drop. And don't forget to check me out over at Football Guys, doing a lot of things over there. Head over to footballguys.com to find more. So without further ado, let's get into the show today. We're going to start with Thursday Night Football. The Washington Commanders were soundly defeated by the Green Bay Packers 27-18. And this score does not represent really how this game went. This was a Packers-dominated game. Now, I'll start with the Commander side. Austin Ekeler, unfortunately, tore his Achilles in this game. He's one of the hardest workers out there. He had a great fantasy run with the Chargers. I loved him for fantasy football. We all loved him for fantasy football. He became a fantasy football player that we all loved and adored. And unfortunately, down with an Achilles tear, going to be out for this season. Hopefully, he can make a comeback in the NFL, but at his age range, I'm not sure we're going to see it. So this one just sucks. This one just sucks. Prayers up for him in his recovery process, man. But now back to this Commanders backfield. Ja'Cory Krosky-Merritt gets a huge bump up in the rankings for most people. And personally, I'm using this and taking advantage of it to sell Ja'Cory Krosky-Merritt in fantasy football. He's not a bad player. 14 carries for 99 yards so far in his NFL career. That's about 7 yards per carry. He's looked explosive. He's looked fun. But the problem is his pass catching work and the lack of it. 2 targets, 0 receptions in his first 2 games. He is a 0 in the passing game, and any pass blocking snap that we've seen has not been very good. He's just not a third down back. He's going to get carries on the early downs, and that's great, but the Commanders are going to throw someone else on the field to give targets to in that third down range if they have anyone to. But the targets are just not going to go Krosky-Merritt's way, and as a result, you're dependent on extreme efficiency and touchdowns for Merritt, and that's just not a place you want to be for fantasy football at the running back position, so I'm selling high if I can sell him. This does have a small bump up to Zach Ertz for me because Austin Ekeler and Zach Ertz both have in common that they're the safety blanket for Jane Daniels when there's pressure and when there's a need to dump off the football. Zach Ertz is now absorbing all those targets. We saw 8 targets with Austin Ekeler knocked out of this one. I think Zach Ertz gets a serious bump up from this injury. Now moving to the Packers side of the football. One more thing for the Commanders. Jane Daniels has a knee sprain. He might not be able to play in the next game against the Raiders in week 3, so keep an eye on that. But I think he's going to play. Expect potentially limited mobility, though. Now, looking at the Packers, Tucker Kraft had a huge breakout game, 6 catches on 7 targets, 124 yards, and a touchdown. I expect this breakout to result in steady involvement in this offense for the rest of the season, especially with Jalen Reed's injury. The Packers do like to spread out in their receiving room. They do have a first-round pick in Matthew Golden. So I expect maybe some volatility in targets, but Tucker Kraft after this breakout week, I expect him to maintain a consistent, steady target share in this offense that makes him a fantasy relevant player most weeks in fantasy football. So at the 10 position, especially when he's so athletic and such a good red zone threat, he's someone you got to really keep an eye on as a top 5 tight end rest of the season. Now, Jalen Reed, broken collarbone. He's headed to IR. We mentioned it during the Tucker Kraft talk. Broken collarbone. He's going to be going IR. He's going to miss at least 4 weeks. I'd expect more than that. Unfortunately for Jalen Reed managers, he's off your rosters, or not off your rosters, off your starting lineup. And now looking at Matthew Golden, this gives him a huge opportunity to step up. Do I think he will? Probably not, because I'm going to be honest, I don't think he's that great of a player. However, the opportunity is there. So definitely keep an eye on Golden as we go through the season over the next few weeks. Now let's head to the Miami Dolphins and New England Patriots. 27-33 is the final score here. Drake May, nearly a perfect passer. 19 of 23 of his pass attempts were completed. He looked excellent in this game, especially in that first half. The second half was a little shaky as Miami started to make a huge comeback, but New England got together and won this game. But now looking at this backfield, Ramondre Stevenson had the lead role, and I think this was primarily because TreVeyon Henderson had a couple really bad holding calls in the first couple series. He had 3 holding calls called against him, especially 2 on the first drive. And Mike Vrabel was recently interviewed, and he was talking about that swing, that wheel route that Ramondre Stevenson had downfield that ended up being a great catch. That was supposed to be Henderson. Henderson made that play in practice multiple times against New England defense, and they were all excited for him to make that play in a game, and Henderson was taken off the field because of penalties, and guess what? Ramondre made that play. That's basically exactly what Vrabel said in that interview. So Henderson, I'm buying low if you can still. I know the hype was very, very high for him, and he's disappointing so far. That's why you're buying low, because he's a phenomenally talented player who's just disappointing so far. Get him on your rosters. This reminds me of Jahmyr Gibbs early in his rookie year, where he wasn't super involved in the offense, but then as the season went on, he got seriously more involved and was a breakout star in the majority of the season down the stretch. So I think TreVeyon Henderson is in line for the same thing. Or the first 2 weeks after watching them both play, it's very clear that Henderson is the better player, and I expect him to get on the field more in the future weeks. So now looking at the Miami Dolphins side, Dolphins quarterback Tua Tagovailoa showed us some signs of life in the passing game. It wasn't very efficient. He didn't look great doing it, but he got Tyreek Hill to 100 plus yards. He got Waddle for 66 and 1. That's a great stat line for these two receivers. Great signs of life to see out of these two guys. And then Devon Achane, 90+% of Tua's dropbacks, he ran a route in weeks 1 and 2. This is huge. He is a huge piece of this receiving game. It looks like it's going to be Hill, Waddle, and Achane as the guys in the receiving game. And if Tua can consolidate those targets between those three on a team where the defense is bad and you're going to be forced to throw the football, it's going to be good for fantasy. So Hill, Waddle, and Achane all in starting lineups next week for me. And now looking at the Dallas Cowboys, 40, New York Giants 37. There were 5 lead changes in the fourth quarter of this game. Humongous game. Cowboys end up winning it in overtime with a field goal by Brandon Aubrey. Javonte Williams looked like his old self again, man. 18 for 96 and 1 on the ground, 6 receptions for 33 yards through the air. As long as he keeps playing the way he's played the last couple of weeks, no one is touching him in this backfield. He is the guy, and he's going to be great for fantasy football. Now, looking at Russell Wilson on the Giants, 400 plus yards, 5 touchdowns in this game. Did you have overtime? Yes, but before overtime, the stats were still monstrous. I expect him to be really good for fantasy, man. You saw the week 1 struggles and a new system, new offense, but he came out in week 2 and locked in, and he looked phenomenal doing it. And the thing is, I know people are going to argue, like, well, what about Jackson Dart? Isn't he going to get starting time at some point this season? I think the Giants made it very clear when they called him on the phone for the draft and how they've treated him this offseason. They have him in developmental mode. They don't want to start him too fast. I think Russell Wilson would get the majority of the starts this year. Maybe Jackson Dart gets worked in at the end of the year, but I think majority of the play this year is going to be Russell Wilson. And as a result, look, if you're missing quarterback with Jane Daniels hurt, JJ McCarthy hurt, with Joe Burrow hurt, with Brock Purdy hurt, Russell Wilson is a guy you can absolutely pick up off waivers and start in your lineup next week. Now, Wan'Dale Robinson, this is my top priority waiver pickup of the week, Wan'Dale Robinson. He had 141 yards, catches in all areas of the field. Let's see, look at this. So in his rookie year, he flashed a lot, but then tore his ACL 6 games in. Then we head to 2023 and 2024, the last 2 seasons post ACL. He averaged under 18% of his targets traveling 10 plus yards downfield, which means 88% of his targets were behind 10 yards downfield. That's insanity. That is so short to the line of scrimmage, so close to the line of scrimmage. And that's how Wan'Dale Robinson was used in this offense. But now we're seeing him fully healthy, fully engaged, fully ready to go. And this year we've seen it differently. 34% of his targets have been 10 plus yards downfield, 22% of them going 20 plus yards downfield within his first 2 games. We've seen a huge change in Wan'Dale Robinson's usage where they're taking advantage of his speed and his burning ability downfield and chucking the ball up to him. Now, he's not a crazy contested catch guy at 5'9", 185 or 5'8", 185. But what he is a burner. He can get behind defenders, and he's doing that well. And we're seeing that in the first couple of games. He's a huge piece of this offense. So he's a huge waiver pickup this week. My top guy. Now let's head to the New Orleans Saints, San Francisco 49ers. I'm going to keep this one pretty short and sweet. Christian McCaffrey looks great. Mac Jones was able to provide stability in this offense. Juwan Jennings, 5 for 89 and 1. Expect that in following weeks. And then Kamara, I hinted at the fact that he wasn't getting enough receiving volume in week 1, and he did it in week 2. 6 targets, 6 receptions. Looked very, very solid as a runner against San Francisco. And then Juwan Johnson, he's earned 20 targets the last 2 weeks, been very involved in the offense. He's a huge waiver wire pickup if you can get him still in your leagues at the time position, especially if you're struggling. Mark Andrews, Colson Level, and guys that are disappointing so far. Get Juwan Johnson on your roster. Now, Pittsburgh Steelers 17, Seattle Seahawks 31. Jalen Warren's the guy we need to talk about for the Pittsburgh Steelers. He looks really good in this one. 134 yards, clear lead back of this offense. I don't care what the yards per carry says at 3.3 yards per carry. He looks really good. He's creating yards after contact. He's creating explosive plays. He's looking good with the football in his hands, and he's getting excellent receiving volume from Aaron Rodgers. He's got that trust. I see Jalen Warren as a clear-cut lead back of this offense and a guy that's going to be very relevant for fantasy football this year, because looking at Kenneth Gainwell, he's just a guy. And then Caleb Johnson sent himself into the shadow realm this week. He had a kickoff play. I don't know if you all saw it, but there was a kickoff return where it landed in the landing zone and it hit him. That's a live ball. Like, that's a live ball. He stood there and didn't do anything and watched just bounce into the end zone. And in our new rules, that ball's live in the end zone. That's not just a touchback. That is a live ball. And guess what? Seattle picked it up and scored a touchdown in the end zone because Caleb Johnson did not turn back and run for the ball. Mike Tomlin ain't going to put up with that. Like, that's not going to be handled nicely with Mike Tomlin. That's going to be like, you're on the bench until you can figure that out. Like, that's not going to be treated well by Mike Tomlin. So I expect Caleb Johnson to be put pretty much in the shadow realm. And if you need to, you can drop him in your fantasy leagues right now. So looking at the Seattle side of this football, this is going to be short and sweet as well. Zach Charbonnet had more carries than Kenneth Walker this week, but Kenneth Walker had 10 times the rushing yardage. And that is not made up. That is not exaggerated. That is true. That is a stat. That is true this last week. It's that simple, man. Kenneth Walker's a great football player. He's involved in the receiving game. He's the asset you want in the Seattle backfield. If Kenneth Walker were to go down, Zach Charbonnet is a great asset. But Walker is the guy you want to start, just in case there was any confusion. Now, let's look at the New York Jets, the Buffalo Bills. 10 for the Jets, 30 for the Bills. Bills dominated in this one. They got up early and ran the football and ran that clock out. I'm going to be honest, this Jets game, I'm thrown over my head. Justin Fields looked like a completely different player from what he did in week one. I think after week one, we obviously the Bills got some game film on him. Number one, they were able to use that to their advantage. But number two, I think Justin Fields got concussed earlier in this game than he was taken out. He looked like a man who was concussed on the football field. He was not throwing properly. He looked out of sync completely. He just didn't look mentally like in the right mind. And eventually he got taken out. I think this was a thing where Justin Fields got hit. He felt it. He was like, "Ooh, that hurts," but I'm going to keep playing. I think I got it. And then later in the game, it was like, "Holy crap, I do not know what I'm doing. And I need to be taken out." And the Jets noticed it too and took him out of the game and put him in concussion protocol. And ended up he did have a concussion. So that I'm just throwing this game out the window for Justin Fields in this offense. I'm hoping for better when Justin Fields comes back. But then looking at the Bills are a good football team, man. James Cook is fantastic because the Bills are winning a lot of games. They're going to be ahead, and they're going to be running the football with James Cook and that great offensive line. Josh Allen's fantastic for fantasy football. And then when you look at the Bills receiving room, while it is a bit confusing, as long as the Bills are a good offense, there's going to be relevance here every single week. This week was a rough one because they were just so ahead in this game so early. But as long as the game's relatively competitive, we're going to see value out of Keon Coleman, Khalil Shakir, and potentially Josh Palmer as well. But it might just be confusing on which guy to start on various weeks. Now, Cincinnati Bengals 31, Jacksonville Jaguars 27. Let's jump into this game. Jaguars rookie running back Bashal Tutin had an 8-yard touchdown reception. Excellent play. He made some great moves, but he also had 8 carries for 42 yards and another reception on top of that, making that 8-yard reception and touchdown, 2 receptions for 32 yards on a touchdown. He had a great day. And look, Travis Etienne is the clear lead back. He is the front man. He outsnapped Bashal Tutin by a wide margin, out-touched him by a pretty solid margin. This is Travis Etienne's backfield. But Bashal Tutin proved himself as a very capable running back in the NFL. If Etienne were to go down, or if Etienne were to start slowing down and Bashal Tutin were to outplay him, he's someone that can handle a backfield and potentially be very relevant for fantasy. So keep an eye on Tutin as a great waiver wire pickup this week. Now, let's talk about Jamar Chase in this Bengals offense. Jamar Chase, 16 catches. Great to see that out of him. A bounce back from week one, his struggles. But we're going to have to dial back the Jamar Chase excitement. Joe Burrow, unfortunately, suffered a grade 3 turf toe. He's going to go through surgery, expected to miss at least 3 months. And that means that puts him in a timeline to come back December 15th. Playoffs are in January. So we're only going to have 3-ish weeks for Joe Burrow to play football. And the problem is, if the Bengals with Jake Browning are not in the playoff contention or not seriously in the playoff contention, which is very possible given the fact they have a weak defense and a struggling offensive line, they are not going to force Joe Burrow back in because there's no point. If they're like 6-9 and Joe Burrow's ready to play, they're not going to force him back in because there's no point. why would you force Joe Burrow back in, potentially risking re-injury when your season's already done? Like, there's just no point. So I think Joe Burrow is very droppable in leagues that you don't have an IR spot. I think he's very droppable. And then Jake Browning is a fantastic pickup right now. We saw him in 2023 play for this Bengals offense, and he was a QB1 in those like 6 or 7 games that he played. 6, 7. Sorry, I had to. But Jake Browning, great waiver I pick up for this week if you need quarterback. Now, looking at the Detroit Lions Chicago Bears game, Rome Odunze is the big highlight for the Bears, man. This Bears offense looks a bit dysfunctional, but Rome Odunze is flashing big time. He's led the team in targets in 2 straight weeks, led the team in route run 2 straight weeks, and he's scored 3 touchdowns in 2 games. He's been a phenomenal asset. He looks great. Caleb Williams and Rome Odunze's connection is on point. This is the one bright spot in this offense that's really clicking, and it's lovely to see. So keep starting Rome Odunze in fantasy football. And now let's talk about DeAndre Swift. This one's rough. I'm going to be honest. I'm just going to apologize out front. I thought DeAndre Swift would be able to do better. I thought this offensive line would be able to play better. And I thought DeAndre Swift would be able to just do more with what he has in this offense. And I thought this offense was just going to be a lot better. And it simply isn't yet. And as a result, we're seeing DeAndre Swift struggle for fantasy purposes. And it's a big problem because it was okay for fantasy the first 2 weeks. He had like 8 and 13 PPR points. But the problem is Kyle Monungai got very involved. I was tweeting about it late last week. We saw a lot of practice reports saying Kyle Monungai is going to be more involved in this offense in week 2. We saw quotes from Ben Johnson himself through the week. And on like Saturday or like Saturday night, Sunday morning, I was like, if you can get a last second trade in and sell DeAndre Swift, please do so. I was able to get one done where I sold Emeka Buka and DeAndre Swift, and I was able to get back Rome Odunze, which I feel really good about, and Travion Henderson, which I also feel really good about. I feel great about that trade now because DeAndre Swift had 15 opportunities this past week. Monungai had 10. And Monungai looked pretty solid. So I'm pretty afraid of what's going to happen with DeAndre Swift. To anyone who listened to me in fantasy football and was able to snag up some DeAndre Swift, I'm incredibly sorry because I don't know if this one's going to work out. This was one of my poor takes this year. I mean, look, it's week 2. We can't say anything concretely yet, but it's not looking good for the DeAndre Swift fan club, aka me. My bad, guys. So Detroit's offense, they're going to be A-okay, 52 points. Not worried about them at all. Tennessee Titans and Los Angeles Rams, Cam Ward and Alec Manor. That is a fantastic duo that you got together. That's a real connection. These guys are really connecting on a nice level. You saw it in preseason. You're seeing it now. You saw it in training camp. You're seeing it now. And there was one touchdown play where it was just, I mean, they were in the red zone, big play, and Cam Ward just running down to the field to the right side and just chucks it across his body, across the entirety of the field to the left side of the end zone and gets Alec Aminar for a score. Just ridiculous play. I mean, I like, as probably a head coach probably wouldn't want him to throw that ball. The coach probably told him on the sideline, yeah, never do that again because it looked wacky and ridiculous and it looks like an interception waiting to happen. But it was a beautiful throw by Cam Ward. Absolutely beautiful. Great to see him making a kind of big kind of play like that. So Alec Aminar, definitely a valid pickup this week in fantasy, especially in deeper leagues. But for now, Ridley and Aminar are not forced into my fantasy lineups right now. They're mostly on my bench. Now, Blake Corum for the Rams, 5 for 44 and 1 later in the game. Great to see him get involved and great to see him looking good. He's a better running back than Kyren Williams, who again averaged 3.7 yards per carry this past week, just like he did in week 1 and just like he does all the time. He's not that good of a running back. He simply isn't that good of a player. He scores touchdowns. That's what makes him relevant for fantasy. He has a lot of volume in the running game, and it's what makes him relevant for fantasy. But other than that, he's just not a good player. He's unable to create explosive plays. He doesn't create much yardage on his own. He gets what the system gives to him, and that's all he does. As simple as that. He's just not that great of a player, and he continues to look like that. And it's just frustrating. It's frustrating, like, because the thing is, he keeps scoring and he keeps doing well for fantasy, but he doesn't look good doing it, and it's really annoying. I'm gonna be honest, really annoying. But Blake Corum, someone you want to pick up on waivers this week, if you got him on your waiver wire. Now, Ravens 41, Browns 17. Let's talk about Zay Flowers and the Ravens, man. 41.6% target share in the last 2 weeks combined. And that's not like 20% plus 20%. He's averaged 41.6% over the last 2 weeks. Like, this is humongous target share we're talking about for Zay Flowers. And this is not something we've seen from him before. This is a ridiculous target share. Now, obviously, this is probably not going to keep up in the same way. But what we're seeing is that the Ravens are seriously prioritizing getting Zay Flowers in their offense, even if they're up by 1 billion points, even if they're not even if it's a blowout, even if it's competitive, it doesn't matter. There's clearly prioritizing getting Zay Flowers in their offense and fading away from Mark Andrews. And this is huge for fantasy football purposes. Mark Andrews is somebody that I'm starting to get seriously worried about starting in my fantasy lineups. And especially with Isaiah likely gone, he's still not being able to produce. It's really bad. And then Zay Flowers, man, he's a locked and loaded asset in my lineup right now until we see otherwise. And then looking at the Browns, you got to trade for Quinshon Judkins, man. Quinshon Judkins looked pretty flashy. Obviously, look, the one run against the second team Ravens defense in the fourth quarter was like 30 of his 60 yards on his 10 carries. The rest of his carries, he looked average on in terms of yards per carry basis. But watching him play was nice. He made some great yards after contact. He had some great plays. I think he looked pretty good considering what the Browns did in that game. They were awful against the Baltimore Ravens. And just remember, guys, this was his first ever NFL game after an offseason where he didn't show up to training camp, didn't practice, didn't have preseason, got in legal trouble, and didn't sign his rookie contract until like 5 or 6 days before this game. Like, he was just fresh off a handful of practices. That was all he had with the Cleveland Browns. He was able to do that in his first game. I'm pretty impressed. I think that's a really awesome thing. And also, he earned the trust in the receiving game too with 3 targets and caught all 3 of them. So great to see that from Quinshon Judkins in his first game. I think it's only going to get better. He's only going to get more acclimated. He's only going to get more involved in this offense and only going to get better as an NFL player. And as a result, I think we're going to see a lot of fantasy football value. So keep an eye on Quinshon Judkins. If you can trade low for him still, go out and do that. Now, Colts. Broncos lose 28-29 in a close battle here. Bo Nix came out and really cleaned it up. He looked fantastic. No worries about him rest of season. He really came out after a bad week 1, cleaned it up, and looked great. Troy Franklin, 8 for 89 and 1, looked great. He's someone that you got to pick up on waivers this week because Courtland Sutton obviously is probably the wide receiver on this team, but Evan Ingram does not look good. They don't have Devon Vele, so they need the wide receiver 2 in Denver. They desperately need someone, and Marvin Mims likely not going to cut it. It could be Troy Franklin stepping into year 2, so keep an eye on him. 8 for 89 and 1 this week. Really, really good production. Now, let's look at the Colts side of the football. Daniel Jones, 2 straight fantastic weeks. 71.4% completion percentage, 2 touchdowns passing, 3 rushing. He looks in command of this offense, man. He just looks good. He looks like the system's working for him. And I'm going to be honest. Like, I think in redraft, he's a great pickup if you need a quarterback short term for now. But in Dynasty, I think he's a good sell candidate. There are a lot of people that are starting to call him the savior of the Colts. And like, look at him. He's completely refreshed his career. That's possible. Yes, that is 100% possible. But I've seen too many of those tweets after 2 weeks. It's only been 2 games. It's only been 2 contests. I can't buy in that hard yet. So if you can sell Daniel Jones for really it's the type of thing where Sam Darnold was valued as like a QB1 in Dynasty in the middle of his Minnesota run. If you can get that kind of value for Daniel Jones right now, I'd absolutely take it because people are completely erasing what we saw in like his first 5 straight seasons. Pure mediocrity, almost clown level play. Clown level play. We saw so many fumbles, so many interceptions, so many messy plays, just not functional in the Giants offense. And then all of a sudden 2 games go by and he's all of a sudden the savior of the Colts. That's a really hard narrative to believe. So if you can sell Daniel Jones in Dynasty for high prices, go for it. So now looking at the Arizona Cardinals and the Carolina Panthers, Bryce Young, 35 and 55 for 328 and 3. Look, he had an early fumble, like not even 2 minutes into the game that led to an Arizona touchdown on defense. Big loss there. He looked messy in the first half of the game. They were down 20-3, but then he really turned around the second half. They had to do a lot of passing the football, and Arizona likely played a little bit more conservative on defense, being up about 2 scores. But Bryce Young really put together a great game towards the end, and almost had this win just short. It was kind of more like what we saw in the second half of the season for Bryce Young last year, where he was consistently putting up production, consistently keeping his team in the game, and putting the team on his back a little bit. We saw that a little bit in this game against Arizona. I really hope that in future weeks we see more of a bounce back from Bryce Young and see him get more back to the second half of what we saw last year. Now, looking at the receiving room, we showed signs of life here. Hunter Renfrow, 9 targets, 7 receptions, 42 yards, and 2 touchdowns. He was consistently involved in that short intermediate range of the field, running great routes. And I think he's somebody that can absolutely be a short-term Band-Aid for you if you need some wide receiver help. So definitely worth a look on waiver wires. But remember, Jalen Cooker's in IR. He's coming back soon. I expect him to be a relevant player in this offense. So I don't think Hunter Renfro's dominance here will last very long, if at all. And then T-Mac for 100 almost at 100 yards on 10 targets. That's excellent to see. It's just under a 20% target share for him in this game with 55 racing pass attempts. I love to see that in week 2. He'll only continue to develop, only continue to get better in this offense, and only continue to put up more fantasy points. So love to see the 100-yard game for T-Mac, his first one in the NFL. And then Jatavian Sanders, a guy that I liked a lot this offseason, earned 9 targets, went 7 for 54, was a consistent option for him, for Bryce Young in the short intermediate ranges as well. He was very, very good after the catch too, making some solid plays, consistently getting physical yards. Really like to see it from Sanders. He's worth a pickup, a look on waivers as well if you need tight end. Now, Arizona side of the football, we're talking about one thing and one thing only, and that's Marvin Harrison Jr. I mean, wow. I don't know what to say anymore, man. It's really hard to defend him. It's getting difficult. Like after the first year, I was like, I'm willing to call a breakout in year 2 because he's the 4th overall pick. He's immensely talented. I don't know what to do here, man. 2 of 5 for 27, 20% target share. That's fine. That's good. But for what we want him to be, that's really not that good. I'm worried about him, man. This is getting really worrisome. And he's someone that I'm considering benching next week for sure. And last thing for Arizona, Trey McBride is wide receiver 1 of this offense. Now, Eagles 20, Chiefs 17. Jalen Hurts in this passing offense is something you got to be worried about. 253 pass yards for Jalen Hurts in both games combined. And A.J. Brown and Devontae Smith have combined for 13 catches and 104 yards in their first 2 games together. That's rough. Like, that's really poor production. And the thing is, they're winning games and it's working for them. And they're not going to be afraid to keep doing it. That's just rough. That is not good for fantasy purposes. So I'm definitely considering A.J. Brown as somebody that you might be able to put on the bench next week, depending on your other options. And Smith, definitely. Now on the Chiefs side, there's not really much to add here, honestly. It's kind of the same. Patrick Mahomes, he's on pace for 1,000 rushing yards right now. He's really good in the running game, and he's good for fantasy as a result. But until these weapons get back, this offense is dysfunctional. Like Xavier Worthy and Rashee Rice are needed back in this offense. For now, it's literally just Mahomes running the football and finding weapons every once in a while. And Falcons 22, Vikings 6. We have a bunch of injuries for the Vikings. Aaron Jones with a hamstring injury. Jordan Mason could take over this backfield in the next couple weeks, depending on if he plays or not. So keep an eye on Jordan Mason as a potential workhorse back for the Vikings. And then J.J. McCarthy, ankle injury in this game. There was a couple plays where it could have happened. We're not really sure exactly when. But he probably, he got hit in the ankle, probably felt okay, played through it. And then the next day he really felt it. That's what happens with a lot of ankle injuries. We've seen that before in the NFL. So he's going to miss the next 2 to 4 weeks per most reports. And as a result, Carson Wentz is going to be the starting quarterback. I'm not really doing too much to change my rankings. Justin Jefferson's pretty high. TJ Hawkinson's a tight end 1. And Jordan Addison, when he comes back, I expect him to be a pretty relevant fantasy football contributor because Kevin O'Connell knows how to work with multiple quarterbacks. We saw Justin Jefferson dominate with Nick Mullins, a quarterback. I think he can do fine with Carson Wentz. Now, Falcons side of the football in this game. Holy crap, Bijan Robinson's really good at football. I'll say that. And then pick up Darnell Mooney is a great waiver wire pickup right now. He's going to be a relevant option in this offense, in my opinion. When you look at the offense in general, they need a wide receiver 2. Kyle Pitts has served him very well at tight end, but they need a wide receiver 2. And we saw Mooney go for almost 1,000 yards last year. So 2 receptions in his first game back, 4 targets, looks solid on them. I would pick him up off waivers if he's available. He's available in about 40-45% of sleeper leagues. And now lastly, let's talk about Monday Night Football. We had 2 contests in this one. The Tampa Bay Buccaneers defeated the Houston Texans. It was a touchdown within the last 10 seconds of the game by Rachaad White that sent the Buccaneers to the victory. Great end of that game. Now let's talk about Bucky Irving. 2 straight games of 4+ receptions, 10 receptions total on the season. While he's splitting some rushing work with Rachaad White, it's clear who the pass catching back is here in Tampa Bay, and that is Bucky Irving. And Baker Mayfield, with the lack of weapons around him due to injury, Baker Mayfield is not afraid to give Bucky Irving 4 to 7 targets per game. And as a result, we're going to see Bucky be a monster in fantasy football with that PPR baseline. So that's great to see. And then looking at the Houston side of the football, man, this backfield too, let's talk about it. Nick Chubb, has had a pretty sustainable 2 weeks. Very solid, getting good gritty yards, yards after contact, consistently pushing the pile. He's had a couple nice burst runs with 10, 15 plus yards, and he scored a really nice touchdown late for Houston that put them in the lead. Unfortunately, Tampa Bay came back and won that game at the end of it, like we talked about a second ago. But Nick Chubb had a clutch play in the end of that game. Like they're trusting him late in the game with their backfield. He seems to be the guy. Now, watch out for Woody Marks too. He had a couple nice carries in this game, but right now it's Nick Chubb as the guy, and doesn't have a ton of pass catching upside, but he's going to be relevant for fantasy football. Now, let's talk about Los Angeles. They beat the Las Vegas Raiders 20-9. So look, man, this was a really good game by Los Angeles. Justin Herbert looked fantastic. The receiving game was on point between Keenan Allen, Ladd McConkey, and Quentin Johnson, all scoring at least 11 plus PPR fantasy points. But let's talk about this backfield. Towards the end of the game, there's about like 3 minutes left. Chargers have the football. They're up by 2 scores, 20-9. What do? You run out the clock. First carry goes to Marion Hampton. He fumbles the football. First carry in that drive, fumbles the football. Hadn't looked that great all game, and then he fumbles, giving the Raiders a chance to come back. And while the Raiders don't take advantage of this open door, it still was an open door that Marion Hampton gave them. And the rest of that game, you saw Najee Harris close it out in the last few minutes with that last Chargers drive. Hampton did not touch the field after that fumble. Look, Hampton, he was looked like a really solid talent. I personally had him ranked as my RB3 behind Trayvon Henderson. I thought he was a tad overrated as a first round pick, but even considering that my ranking of him, I'm still disappointed by what we've seen by Amari Hampton. 3 yards per carry in each of his first 2 games. He's looked like another Najee Harris. He hasn't been super involved in the pass catching game. He hasn't looked super explosive as a runner. He's looked like a solid grinder and nothing more than that. And now with a fumble late in the game in this second week, it's just not good to see. So I'm starting to get really worried about Amari Hampton, his potential fantasy football value, because we're seeing Najee Harris continue to be involved, especially as a receiver on third downs. And now looking at Justin Herbert, on the other hand, too, he takes away carries. 16 carries in the last 2 weeks for Justin Herbert. He's stacking up some really solid rushing yards and some rushing touchdown potential as well. It's great to see that for his fantasy ball value, because not only is he commanding this offense with this offense leaning pass first, but he's also seriously involved in the running game, and he's looking like a monster pick in fantasy football this season so far. If he's somehow still available on your waiver wires, I know he is in a couple leagues, go ahead and grab him. And if he's available for trade, if someone makes him available, go out and get him. He looks like he's going to be a monster in fantasy football this year. And then lastly, let's talk about the Las Vegas Raiders side of this game. Geno Smith. The first couple weeks have been rough, and especially this night against the Los Angeles Chargers. I don't know. The Chargers were covering really well. They got on Geno Smith under pressure really well, but Geno just looked messy. He looked rough in this one, consistently overthrowing or underthrowing his receivers, consistently missing reads. He had some wide open plays that he just missed, and it's just he didn't look good, man. He really looked poor in this game. I hope we see a bounce back in this new team, new system, new offense soon. But the first couple weeks have not been super inspiring. But for this offense, though, Brock Bowers didn't have a great game. He's a decoy in this game, mostly because of that knee injury. I think the Raiders are just being conservative. I think next week will be totally fine. And Jacoby Myers, he is a must start every single week and as a flex play. He's going to get you a baseline of 10 plus PPR points every single week. He's like a 5-catch lock every single game. It's just he's involved in this offense, and there's nothing else you can do about it. And last thing I'll touch on the Raiders. Why the heck is Zamir White on the field? There was a play that was specifically so insane. It was 3rd and 2, huge moment in the game, and they give a carry strip that got to Zamir White, and of course he gets negative -4 yards in the play. I don't even understand. Like Ashton Genty was a top 10 overall pick in the draft. You give him the freaking rock on 3rd and 2 in a huge moment. Like that's just simple math. You give Ashton Genty the football. I don't understand why they're trying to get Samir White involved. Should be Ashton Genty's backfield, but hey, this is how it's running right now, and Genty is still being a mediocre asset for fantasy right now to start the season. But you gotta keep starting him and hope that breakout comes soon. But that's going to be it for Monday Night Football Breakdown. It is 1:17 a.m. right now. I'm on Eastern Time, breaking down Monday Night Football right after it happens. So got to go to bed after this. But thank you all so much for tuning in. Greatly, greatly appreciate you listening to Hutch Coming in Clutch. Before I go, please follow me on Twitter at HutchsonB_FF. Make sure you subscribe to this podcast wherever you're listening so you'll be notified every single time an episode does drop. Also, check out my work over at Football Guys and make sure to come back on Thursday to prep for week 3. We'll see you all then.